I'm doing an SVT-II Pro from Ampeg. And as you can see here, I've got the 6 cathode sensing resistors, or whatever you want to call them, out. Those are going to get replaced because this amp was unhappy. And you can see there's a trace here that burned in the past. And so previous tech put in this jumper wire to replace that trace. I don't think he did the world's best job. And so I'm going to redo that a little nicer. So let me get all that, and then we're going to go to some stuff on the output section board. Okay, all those new resistors in place. The previous tech had a wire going from here to here and then from here to here, which had a lot of solder on that one little spot. I had a larger spot here from this resistor, so I went from here to here and here to here. Just a little bit more mechanical strength. It's got some diodes added here across R8, a cap added here. These are later service bulletins just to get it up to a later spec. Okay, this is the output board. On this, I'm going to remove these diodes in parallel with these 22 ohm resistors on the screens. And I'm going to replace those 22 ohm resistors with 220 ohm resistors mounted off the board for a little bit more airflow. But for right now, I'm just going to get this out of the way. And I'll move this to the side on the bench because it takes up a lot of real estate, as you can imagine. Here you can see those original 2-watt resistors in the cathode have been replaced with these 5 watts. And they just fit. And those 2 watts fail a lot. 3 watts would be better. I could just squeeze in these 5 watts, and these will run cooler and not be as stressed. There's a couple little service updates to the unit I'll be doing after I get the output section board rebuilt. Just a cap to prevent false triggering, and I'll double check a fuse setting from the factory updates and all that fun stuff on these. The SVT Pro and the SVT-II Pro and the SVT Classic are very similar amps in a lot of ways. And they are not fun to work on. But my God, can they sound good. Okay, as you can see, I've got the tubes back in place and that cover back in place. Notice all the holes in the cover on the SVT-II Pro. That's for ventilation, which is a good thing. But also notice how much dust is inside the rest of the chassis. This amp gets dust in it. The fan brings dust into it with all the airflow, and it settles there. And those holes mean that that dust gets down on the board below. So I had to clean out the sockets a good bit. Also notice that I do not have the spring tube retainers in place. On newer SVTs, they're using little clamps that just clamp onto the bottom base down here on the 6550s. Those are fantastic. But the old ones, which have the springs coming up here to clips, those kill 6550s. The metal just breaks the glass over time. And it's really not necessary. These belt-in sockets are rock solid as long as you don't drop it. And it's, it's a very expensive, heavy amp. You should be careful not to drop it anyway. It does not need tube retainers typically. The side clamps are much better, but the springs are terrible. So I've got it sitting here, and it's biased and seems so far to be maintaining its bias. But I'm going to let that run about 20 minutes, then do some playing tests and see where we're at, because that right here can go wonky after 10 to 15 minutes in my experience. Wonky is a very technical term. Pardon the clutter under my bench there. Okay, ready for some playing tests. God, that fan's annoying. I prefer the ones where you can switch it off. But anyway, I borrowed this bass from my buddy Eric at Martin Music because I'm doing a lot of bass amps this week, and I don't have a bass right now. That'll be the next signal generator search. This is a Music Man Sterling, what is this called? Ray 25CA. It's about 550. It's a really nice bass. 5-string. I haven't had a 5-string in a long time. I haven't had a bass in a long time. I'm a once and future bass player. But I have tons of signal generators that go sine waves and all that kind of stuff. And that tells you somewhat about how an amp responds. But it doesn't replicate transients of actual playing. Or just all the little subtleties that a player picks up on that a sine wave doesn't necessarily give you. So now you're hearing this cell phone video, and I'm plugged into a guitar 2x12 cabinet and a load box to give me the proper output impedance for this beast. I don't have a 400, I really need about 600 watt bass cab to handle this at full volume. So before I sign off on this, I will take this up to Martin Music and play it through the proper bass cabinet to make sure that everything is great at really high volume. But I can go a bit higher on this. I've got a 300 watt load box, and I've got a 140 watt cab, 300 watt load and a 140 watt cab. So the load's going to take about half that. So this should be fine as long as I don't do anything crazy. But you're not going to hear that low B through this setup. Like I said, once a feature. Yeah, 5 strings take some getting used to, and my hands are all out of shape. So I need to get a bass for test purposes, right? That's what we tell ourselves. So far, this amp sounds great. The bias has not been drifting. It's handling the signal just fine. So I'm going to do a torture test of much higher volume through a full bass cab, make sure I haven't missed anything. But I'm very confident that this amp should be hunky-dory. I'll stop here.